Why is it that even the most intelligent men, with status, insight, and strength, collapse in the presence of beauty? Why do they see her face and forget their past? Why do they hear her laugh and silence their doubt? Why, even after being deceived, do they say, "She didn't mean it"? Because they believe in something deeper than logic. They believe in her innocence. This belief, though unspoken and unconscious, is so powerful that even Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, couldn't escape its grip. And yet, it was Freud who dared to ask the question that still makes modern psychology tremble. What does a woman want? He didn't ask this from arrogance. He asked it from bewilderment. He studied thousands of cases. He spent decades probing the unconscious. He invented the very field that reveals the lies we tell ourselves. And still, he could not find a stable answer. Because what he uncovered challenged one of the most sacred illusions in Western culture, that women are inherently pure. The illusion of innocence, why Freud couldn't look away. Freud's work exposed a different reality, one hidden beneath centuries of projection, mythology, and cultural idealism. A woman's superego is less strict, less impersonal, and less capable of sublimation. Freud, in plain terms, she is not as bound by guilt, not as confined by the same inner judge. What does that mean for the modern man? It means her innocence is performed, not proven. It means her tears, her charm, her softness, all real, but not always moral. Freud found that beneath the cultural pedestal lies something older, more primal, instinct without apology, desire without explanation, and power that comes from not being questioned. The woman Freud studied wasn't evil. She was free in a way that terrified the men around her. And when she used that freedom to manipulate, test, withdraw, seduce, Freud realized something few have dared to admit since. Her innocence is your illusion, and if you don't see through it, you will surrender to it. The Virgin Myth, from religion to romanticism. The myth of female innocence didn't start with psychology. It didn't even start with romance. It began with religion. In the Christian tradition, the most exalted woman is not a queen, a scholar, or a warrior. She is the Virgin Mary, a woman whose power lies not in her words or deeds, but in her purity. The sacred feminine was tied to untouched flesh, to silence, obedience, and submission. To be innocent was to be holy. This ideal spread across centuries of Christian Europe, painting every woman with one of two brushes. The Madonna, worthy of veneration. The whore, worthy of shame. There was no in-between. The woman who expressed sexual agency, opinion, or ambition was dangerous, temptress, sinner, Eve. The woman who kept quiet, smiled sweetly, and sacrificed was divine. Freud was born into a world still gripped by this binary, but he saw cracks in the image. In his clinic, he met women who played the Madonna role perfectly until the door closed. Behind that door, they confessed rage, lust, manipulation, jealousy, cruelty. The most virtuous woman can have the most perverse fantasy, Freud wrote. It wasn't judgment, it was observation. The modern myth of female innocence continued through Romanticism, the cultural movement that followed the Enlightenment. Romantic poets like Goethe, Shelley, and Keats worshipped women from afar, idealized her as muse, obeyed her as goddess, died for her in poetry. But it wasn't her they loved. It was their own projection. The woman became a screen. Onto her, men cast their longing for peace, for purpose, for beauty, for salvation. And because she was seen as pure, her wounds were never questioned. Her guilt was overlooked. Her manipulation was explained away, because to accuse her was to lose the fantasy. And that, for most men, is unthinkable. Suppressed drives, the unconscious psychology of innocence. What looks pure may not be empty. What sounds soft may not be safe. What appears innocent may simply be hidden. This was the ground Freud walked every day, not just in theory, but in practice. He listened to women from every walk of life, aristocrats, artists, housewives, and what he discovered behind their elegance and poise wasn't maliciousness. It was unconscious drive. Much of our mental life is unconscious. That is, it exists and acts, but we are unaware of it. Freud's radical insight was this: people are not transparent, even to themselves. We act from places we do not know, behaviors whose roots we do not see. We cling to innocence because it protects us from guilt and protects our image from scrutiny. And women, they are no exception. In fact, according to Freud, many of the female neurotic symptoms he encountered arose precisely from this split between the outward image of gentleness and the repressed inner world of rage, rivalry, and desire. The good girl who secretly loathed her father. The devoted wife who fantasized about revenge. The gentle daughter whose dreams were filled with power, cruelty, and domination. These were not flukes. They were patterns. Freud traced them to the Oedipal complex and its counterpart, the Electra complex, where the child forms intense emotional attachments to the opposite sex parent and hostility toward the same sex parent. In women, this often meant unresolved aggression toward the mother and a conflicted desire for the father's love, protection, or even dominance. These deep, unconscious drives don't just fade, they mutate. They form the adult woman's behavior, her attraction patterns, her manipulation strategies, her self-image, her guilt, or lack thereof. Because these drives are unconscious, they can be projected outward. This means the woman may believe she's being attacked when she's doing the attacking. She may claim to be misunderstood while hiding her own motives. She may appear innocent while enacting subtle domination. Freud never said women were evil. He said they were human. And humans are driven not by morality, but by unconscious need. The mask of virtue, how guilt is disguised as goodness. Virtue can be real, but it can also be a disguise. This is one of Freud's most unsettling insights, and one that psychology still hesitates to confront. What appears to be goodness may simply be guilt in costume. For many women raised under centuries of religious, familial, and social control, the demand was clear: be pure, be kind, be modest, be good. But underneath those rules, a boiling conflict, a world of suppressed instincts and forbidden desires. Freud observed how many symptoms of neurosis emerged not from rebellion, but from over-identification with virtue. That is, the more a woman tried to be perfect, the more fractured she became inside. The more she appeared angelic, the more shadow she repressed. This repression doesn't erase the shadow. It merely coats it in sugar. What emerges is a carefully curated identity, a mask of virtue that satisfies society while hiding the truth from herself. This woman becomes the embodiment of innocence, the helpful friend, the devoted partner, the sacrificial mother. But behind the mask, she resents her obligations. She manipulates through emotional debt. She weaponizes guilt to maintain control. Most people do not really want freedom, because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. Freud saw this fear play out in the lives of women who unconsciously preferred the moral pedestal to the existential burden of self-honesty. Why? Because as long as she appears good, she cannot be challenged. This is not malevolence, it is survival. In a world that punishes female agency and rewards female submission, many women have learned to translate power into virtue, to control not with force, but with fragility. She says she's hurt. She says she's misunderstood. She says she just wants peace. And yet, somehow, she always gets her way. The man walks on eggshells. The man apologizes for everything. The man bends to avoid being the villain. But what if her virtue isn't moral? What if it's strategic? Emotional debt. Why men inherit the guilt. There's a strange law few men ever recognize. When she feels guilt, he often takes the blame. Not because he is guilty, but because she cannot carry it. This is emotional debt, a phenomenon that Freud never fully named, but his work makes visible in case after case. Men absorbing what women cannot consciously process. Let's be clear, this isn't about abuse or malice. It's about projection and unconscious dynamics. When a woman lives under the pressure of being good, she builds a persona that cannot admit darker truths. The resentment she feels, the control she desires, the punishment she believes she deserves. And rather than face those truths, she projects them outward, onto the man. She frames his words as attacks. She reinterprets his boundaries as cruelty. She turns her own shame into his responsibility. He is now too harsh, too selfish, too much. And because the man wants to keep the peace or win her approval, he accepts the role. He apologizes. He tries harder. He gives more. But he doesn't realize he's paying off a guilt that was never his. Freud called this transference, a process of displacing feelings from one person onto another, often from childhood figures onto current relationships. In this case, the woman is often transferring guilt she inherited from a cold or critical mother, a distant or disappointed father, a culture that equated her value with obedience. He becomes her emotional accountant, balancing the books of her inner world, trying to prevent another episode, another withdrawal, another sad look. But no matter how much he gives, it's never enough, because he's not just failing her expectations, he's failing the ghost of her past. And here's the tragedy. The more guilt he takes on, the less he respects himself, and the less she respects him. Why? Because the man who can't see through projection is not a man who can lead. The guilt trap. How female fragility becomes male submission. She doesn't have to raise her voice. She doesn't have to demand. She only has to flinch, or cry, or fall silent. And suddenly, he folds. This is the guilt trap. The invisible snare that turns strong men into obedient shells. Freud never gave this tactic a name, but his case studies are filled with its shadow. What he saw, again and again, was this. When female fragility is performed, or unconsciously used as a strategy, it bypasses a man's logic and attacks his instinct to protect. That instinct isn't wrong, but when it's unguarded, it becomes his prison. Let's be clear. Not all expressions of fragility are manipulative. Some are real. Some are sacred. But when repeated, predictable, and always used at the point of confrontation or boundary, they reveal something deeper. A refusal to face discomfort and a tactic to maintain control. It works because of what Freud called reaction formation, a defense mechanism by which unacceptable impulses are transformed into their opposite. So the need for dominance becomes helplessness. The rage becomes sadness. The demand becomes passivity. And now, the man is cornered. Because how do you challenge someone who appears to be collapsing? You don't. You comply. You apologize. You make it right. But here's the cost. Every time you submit to unspoken guilt, you lose a piece of your clarity. And slowly, without knowing, you become a servant to her emotion. You no longer speak freely. You no longer assert truth. You no longer lead, because her discomfort has become your master. You now lives inside a script. Don't make her cry. Don't upset her. Don't be the bad guy. But if telling the truth makes you the villain, you're in a trap. Freud believed liberation came through exposure, through bringing unconscious dynamics into the light of awareness. Breaking the spell. Freud's unspoken cure. The spell is subtle. It doesn't strike like lightning. It whispers, "Don't hurt her. Be better than the last man. Prove you're good enough." And in that whisper, a man begins to vanish. Freud saw it, not in roaring tyrants or broken addicts, but in men who had lost their core by serving someone else's emotional myth. They didn't need punishment. They needed truth, and that truth, Freud believed, had to be born through pain, not suffering, but confrontation, with the illusions we inherited, with the roles we perform, with the projections we accept as real. This was Freud's unspoken cure. Not to fix the woman, but to wake the man. To wake him from the trance of guilt, the seduction of innocence, the longing to be enough for someone else's validation. Because that longing, it's a trap. A man who seeks salvation in a woman's eyes will always become the reflection she wants. He will become obedient, not out of love, but out of fear. Where blind instinct ruled, awareness must rise. And what does that look like in the context of this guilt trap? It means you question the script. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You allow her pain, but do not inherit it. You face her tears, not with cruelty, but with clarity. You don't rescue her from her shadow. You reflect it back. You don't aim to be the good man. You aim to be a real one, even if that means being misunderstood, rejected, or alone for a time. The man who breaks the spell doesn't hate women. He simply refuses to worship the illusion. And in doing so, he awakens not just himself, but her. The myth of innocence was yours all along. The great betrayal isn't that women wear masks, it's that men believe in them. But here's the deepest truth Freud dared to reveal. The myth of female innocence is not her lie. It's your projection. A mirror of your forgotten mother. A symbol of your lost Eden. A relic of your unmet needs. And as long as you chase that innocence in a woman, you will never meet her as she is. You will idealize her, then resent her, then collapse when she doesn't fulfill the script. Freud knew the cost of that illusion. Men drained by endless giving. Men confused by contradiction. Men emotionally imprisoned by a role they never agreed to. When you see the innocence myth for what it is, a fantasy constructed to soothe your own internal chaos, you finally come home. You stop chasing her perfection. You start confronting your wounds. You stop playing the hero. You start becoming the man. The sovereign man doesn't need her to be innocent. He needs her to be real, because he knows he cannot be manipulated by a mirror he no longer projects onto. That is what modern psychology won't admit, because it offends comfort. It demands responsibility. So now you see it. The myth of innocence. The guilt you inherited. The spell that was cast. And most of all, the choice you now hold. To reclaim your boundaries. To speak the truth. To honor her soul without sacrificing your own. If this video woke you up, then like and subscribe, because in the next video we're going deeper into Plato's hidden teaching on female desire buried beneath the dialogues.